So hello internet, what's up? Welcome to JS Cafe. In the previous video, we saw how to implement CSR and SSR using Next.js. So if you haven't seen that, then do check out the episode 2 of rendering pattern series. So in this video, we will be talking about static site generation SSG, and we'll cover three scenarios, which is with data, no data, and fetch data on client. So without wasting any time, let's get started. So, as per our last discussion, we were implementing SSR using get server side props. And one thing important to note over here is that whenever you are requesting for a URL to your next server, then next server actually generates a HTML every time and send it back as a response. Okay. Now imagine your website is really popular and it is addressing so many requests. So this kind of operation becomes a heavier on your server, and this might lead to memory errors kind of stuffs. So here comes the SSG approach, static site generation, where you will build the HTML, right, the whole HTML once only during the build time, and you deploy that build somewhere on your server. Okay, on your you deploy it on GoDaddy, or be it your EC2 instance, or whatsoever, depending upon your use case. Okay, so this time what we did was we created a static HTML file once during the build time. So by build time, I actually mean generating a build for your productions. Okay, so the currently what we do, we do npm run dev, right? This thing we do. So this is a server. Okay, this is a server live running on Next.js. But if we want to generate a build, there is a command called as next build. Okay, this command. So this next build command generates, it packages everything that is in your website in the form of HTML files, and these are static HTML files. Okay, no, these HTML file needs no computation on the server. Okay, think of it as just simple HTML files containing HTML tags, script tags, that like just a normal HTML file over here. So once you build that HTML file from your code, you can actually go ahead and deploy that thing on some other server, be it your EC2 or your GoDaddy or whatsoever, depending upon your use case. Okay. So in this scenario, I will be showing how this particular method, get static props. Okay. Get static props comes into the picture, and how does it helps us. But for starters, let us take SSG without data. Okay, so this would be much easier for you to understand. So we were having this thing, right? My post. Let's suppose you have a SSR already implemented. Okay, now is it possible to generate a HTML file via the build command for a SSR? Okay, do give a thought to this, and meanwhile I will make the changes in the code and show you how will the output be when we run those commands. Okay, so in the package.json, so I'll go ahead and write export over here, and I'll write some commands. Next build, first we will create a build, and next export. Okay, so these two things will come in handy. First we will create a build, and then we will export that build out. Okay, so this is the command that we are going to run, and we have SSR implemented in mypost.js. Okay, so now we will go to this project directory, and we will do npm run export. And before running that command, let us check that the next caching is not present. Okay, .next folder is not there. If you see the .next folder present, then please delete that first and then try to export it. Okay, so in my case, .next folder is not there. And let us go ahead and run this command. Okay, so we got an error. And before seeing that error, let us see what these things means. So you see that this lambda means server, and this circle means static. So lambda in front of my post mean that this is a server. Okay, this is a server side render at the runtime, and circle means that this is a static thing. Okay, so it would be rendered as a static HTML, no initial props. Now there was an error saying that image optimization using Next.js default loader is not compatible with Next export. Possible solution is this. Okay. So first thing is that in the pages, in the index.js, I think it is by default using image, next image. So next image is not compatible with this export command. Okay. So what we will do is, for now, we can get rid of this image. Okay. And we can get rid of everything in the div, and we can write hello world. Okay. Let us save it and run it. Okay, so this time we got another error. It says that, now read this carefully. Error occurred pre-rendering page my post. Read more. Error for page my post. Page with get server side props cannot be exported. Okay, so see this like over here. So you got the gist, right? We, since this my post was using server side, and we were trying to export it via the SSG method. So this is not SSG export. Okay, so server side means that this function is meant to generate HTML during the runtime, not during the build time. Okay, so Next.js throws an error that, hey dude, this server side props was meant to generate a HTML during the runtime, not at the build time. So we cannot export this as a HTML. This is what it is saying for us. And if you have a look at the out folder, you can see that, okay, in the out you will not see. So I'll tell you what this out folder is first. So when you did a export thing, right, so it created a out folder for you which contains the HTML files. So if you have a look at the pages, we have this my post, we have index. Okay, so if you go and click to index.js, it is format document once, you can see that we have this hello world over here. Okay, but we cannot see my post.js. Okay, it was not statically generated as a HTML file during the build time. Why? Because my post.js is a SSR, not a SSG. Okay, so this is a SSR but not a SSG. That was the reason it was not exported to us. Now what is one thing that we can change over here so that it becomes a SSG? Okay, so here comes the three scenarios: with data, no data, and fetch data on the client. Okay, so we are actually having a scenario which is fetching data. Okay, but for simplicity, let us not, have a look into these things. Okay, we should not worry about how the data is coming and every other stuffs. What we can do is, we can for now comment this out and comment this out, and we can write, these are my post, no data. Okay, we are not fetching data from anywhere. Okay, now let us go ahead and try to run. Just let me clear this for you and do npm run export. Now what do you think, this time will it run? Right, so this time it was successful. Okay, and if you go to out folder, you can see that my post.html was present, and if we format the document, you can see that it is containing some JSON. Okay, props, page props, page my post, this is the query and whatnot, right? So it created a JSON. Now just try to think, what's the use case of this JSON over here? Like, how is this playing role in this HTML thing? So this JSON will play a very important role when we encounter the situation of SSG with data. Okay, so what it will do is when we are trying to run a build, so it would execute those API calls and fetch those data and add them in this particular prop over here. Okay. So when those things are added and when you actually go ahead and run that HTML file, all of that data is served from this JSON, not from the API. Okay. I'll tell you how this works. But for now, let us, go ahead and out folder, not this one. Wait a second. Right. Don't save. Hmm. So this was the out folder that we just saw for verification. Yeah, this was it. These are my posts, no data. Now what we want to do is, all you need to do is take this out folder and put it on a server. So for demonstration, I'm actually not putting it on a EC2 or somewhere else. But what we can do is I can put this on a live server for you, that is go live. So I'll go ahead and hit this go live thing, and here it comes. Okay, this is, and you can see that it is a .html file for us, right? So this is the cool thing, right? Because now every time someone comes to your application, you don't have to generate a HTML every time, but instead you created this build once, served it somewhere, and now you can cache that files on any CDN to your nearest customer, and that file can be served to them, right? This is very easy. Now think of use case where this can be implemented. So this thing is very much helpful for less dynamic websites. Less dynamic websites means that once the content is generated, it is same for every customer on your website. For example, be it your blog. Okay, once you write a blog, right, you hardly change anything, right? Once the blog is written, same content is served across every user. Okay, so this becomes a very prominent case of blogs. Okay, a very prominent case to implement your SSG. Okay, so this was a one use case over here, and this was a case where we were implementing SSG with no data. Now let us come back to this part where we were, actually fetching data from an API. Now here comes the part where we actually want to generate a HTML with data populated from an API. So we will uncomment this thing over here, and we will write this would be your SSG now. Okay, we will not write no data over here. We will get rid of this, and let's keep this as it is. Now instead of get server side props, let us go to get static props. So get static prop, let us check the small definition that if you export a function called get static props SSG from a page, Next.js will pre-render this page at the build time using props returned by the get static props, right? So this was the exact definition that we were looking for, and we will copy this function over here and we will paste it, and that's it. Okay, this is it actually. Now if we try to create a build and do npm run export, here it goes. You see that this time it becomes a SSG automatically generated as a static HTML plus JSON, right? Earlier, what was it? Earlier, I think it was no initial props, right? It was, so this time it is a SSG with data. Okay, so this was the implementation, and let us check out the out folder this time. Let us format the document, and you can see that this time in the props we are actually having all of the data pre-fetched for us in the HTML file. Okay, this is crazy, right? Now if I just host this. Okay, it is already hosted. It might be refreshed already. Okay, this was right. This was my post.html, and it is prefetched. It is having prefetched data from the API, and that too in a HTML file. Just imagine the speed at which it will load, right? This would be super fast, right? So this was a scenario where we implemented SSG with the data. Now let's move on to the last category, that is SSG without data, but we fetch the data on the client itself. Okay, so I'll tell you why do we actually need it. Let me take you over here. So when we were generating this build for us, so during the build, we actually wait for the API calls to finish. Okay, so when the API finishes, what we mean by that is when this API call finishes inside the get static props, when we have the data, when we send it to props, then only after that the server is able to create this particular JSON for us. Okay, so during the build time, we have to wait for the data to be fetched from the API. Once it is done, then we move forward to the next file. Okay, this process is happening across for all the files in the application, but this would be time consuming. Okay, let's suppose the APIs are taking so much time, so your build time will get increased very much. Okay, so is there some way where we can avoid this? Yes, we can actually avoid this by this particular part where we fetch the data on the client itself. So I'll show you how this works. So we can take this part and comment this out. Okay, and this time also we are going to generate a static website only, but the only difference is that we are fetching the data on the client instead of fetching the data on the server. That's the only difference. Okay, so I'll write a basic React code for us. Use effect. So I'll do async function fetch data. Okay, I'll write it over here. I'll call this fetch data like this, and once it is done, I'll remove the props. I don't need props, I just need posts, right? So I'll do cons post set post use state empty array, and we'll do set posts data.record.post, right? And we will add one more check, that like this. So I'll add a check if posts dot length and this else say loading from API. Okay, yeah. So now this is the code we have written. We have not utilized get static props. We have not utilized any other stuffs. We have just written simple plain React code, but we will generate a static build out of it. So let us go ahead, clear it, and do npm run export. Okay, it was created and it was a static, no initial props. Okay, this was my post. Now if we go to code and go to my post, is format document. Okay, wait a second, I think we should clear it first. Clear the build folder, delete. ठीक है, go ahead and import. Hmm. And we go in. You see that it is. I'll show you how to say. So we go to network, right? So you saw that this HTML was sent. These are my posts loading from API, and after some time we made a API call to this to fetch our data. So this becomes very interesting, right? We are serving a HTML file that is statically hosted somewhere, but again when loading this thing for us, we are actually hitting API after the page is loaded. So using this approach, you can show skeleton loaders on your website. You can reduce your build time, and I think this approach is actually feasible for the APIs, that changes over time. For example, suppose you are visiting a website that hosts some properties to sell. Okay. For example, at a time it shows 10 properties that are available for selling. Okay. Now let's suppose this particular data is not always consistent, right? Let's suppose there are 10 properties that are available to sell, but on the next very day one property gets sold. Now the count remains how much? The count becomes 9. Okay. But would you create a build of your whole application again just because one property was sold and you want to show 9 properties on your website instead of 10? You'll create a whole build of your application. You'll go ahead and deploy that on EC2 and then show it to users. This is not an efficient way, right? So instead, what you can do is instead you can fetch this particular data, like fetching an API that fetches the record of all the properties that are available for selling from an API. Now whenever that website loads for the client on his browser, it makes a fresh API call every time, and it fetches the data and shows it to the user, so that next time all you need to do is update your database on the backend, so that it sends the updated information from the API, right? And once it is done, it is automatically displayed on your client's browser. You don't have to generate a build every time, deploy it on the server. Okay. So this is the advantage of this part. Okay, fetching the data on your client, and it should be used only if it is required. Okay, it should not, let's suppose you are using it to fetch data for your blogs and literally nobody has changed since 10 days, then what's the point of fetching the data every time for a blog which is already written once? Okay, that doesn't make sense. But for the property website, you are using a static and you are creating build every time. The point that I'm trying to convey is that each of the rendering pattern has its own use case, has its own advantages and disadvantages. Okay, it is unfair to say that this particular rendering pattern is better than this because of this. There can come scenarios where some rendering pattern, despite having flaws, may become beneficial for you. Okay, you have to keep that in mind. And yeah, that is it. So you have to be clear of the rendering patterns of the use cases that comes with it. Okay, and we should not be biased to any rendering patterns, because you can see that, oh, this static SSG pattern is very efficient, we have to create a build once and we have to serve HTML files. But this becomes very impractical for the cases when your website is highly dynamic. For example, take example of social medias. In social medias, do you think you will use a static SSGs? Not possible, right? It is not good for the scenarios where websites are highly dynamic. SSG with fetching data on the client is good for partially dynamic websites, or we can say that are less dynamic, but for heavy dynamic websites it is not suitable. Okay, yeah, so I think this enough of talking for today. I hope you understood the implementation of static site generation and what role does it plays. And we also talked about one major flaw over here, that what if the data changes. Okay, take example of blog again. You created um SSG for blogs. Okay, you generated 10 pages. Now after 2 days the author of one of the blogs updated his content because he found that, oh, I made a mistake in this blog, let me correct it. He corrected the blog. Now, will you generate a whole build for your website just for one small change that the author did, or would you try to find out some other way, or would you implement SSG with fetch data on client? So in this particular scenario, ISG. Okay, this is actually ISG. So incremental site regeneration comes handy. Okay, we will talk about this in the next video. Till then, stay tuned. And yeah, this was all in this video. Till then, take care. Goodbye. If you have any questions, then do let me know in the comments. I'll be happy to answer them. And yeah, this was all in this video. Till then, take care. Goodbye. See you in the next one.